Three armed hunters were walking across my ranch before sunrise, and the woman leading them wasn't a game warden, a county official, or anyone with authority over the land. She was my HOA president, and she was waving a clipboard like it gave her ownership of 600 acres that had belonged to my family for generations. What she didn't know was that she had just marched those men straight into the protected grazing grounds of one of the most heavily monitored heritage cattle programs in the state. My name is Cole Mercer, and if you've ever dealt with someone who mistakes confidence for competence, then you'll understand exactly why this story still gets talked about around here years later. I live outside a small town in western Montana where ranches stretch farther than most people can see, and everybody knows everybody's business whether they want to or not. My wife, Emma, and I inherited the Mercer Ranch from my father, who inherited it from his father before him. It wasn't some giant corporate operation. It was a working family ranch built through decades of hard work, stubbornness, and more than a few sacrifices. The one thing my father always taught me was simple. Respect the land, and the land will take care of you. Most folks around here understood that. Unfortunately, one person never did. Her name wasn't Karen, though she fit every stereotype people joke about online. Around town, her name was Linda Crawford. Linda had moved into the neighboring development about 4 years earlier after retiring from a management position in the city. She quickly became president of the Homeowners Association and somehow convinced herself that running an HOA meant she was qualified to manage everything within 20 miles of her mailbox. It started small. She complained about tractor noise during harvest season. She demanded that ranchers trim trees she didn't own because they blocked views from homes she didn't own either. Then she began organizing community committees dedicated to improving rural land use, which sounded harmless until you realized she meant telling property owners what to do with their own property. Most people laughed her off. I did too at first, but over time I noticed something dangerous about Linda. She genuinely believed she was helping. She wasn't some cartoon villain sitting around plotting ways to make people miserable. The problem was that she had absolutely no understanding of ranching, wildlife management, conservation law, or private property rights. Yet she carried herself like an expert on all four. About a year before everything happened, our ranch was accepted into a heritage livestock preservation program. We maintained a carefully protected breeding herd descended from bloodlines that had become increasingly rare across the country. The bulls were massive animals, powerful enough to flip a truck if provoked. And because of the conservation agreements attached to the program, they were monitored by state agencies and environmental specialists several times each year. Disturbing them wasn't just a bad idea. In certain situations, it could create serious legal consequences. We had signs posted. We had fences. We had documentation. We even gave presentations at local agricultural meetings explaining why those pastures remained restricted. Everyone knew, or at least everyone should have known. Looking back now, I think Linda heard all that information and somehow translated it into something completely different. In her mind, restricted probably meant exclusive, and exclusive meant unfair. A few weeks before the incident, rumors started spreading that hunting access around the county was becoming more limited. Some public lands had temporary restrictions because of environmental studies, and several neighboring ranches had suspended access after fire damage. At a community meeting, Linda stood up and announced that local landowners needed to support hunters by opening and used land. I remember sitting near the back beside Emma when she pointed directly toward me. Some people are sitting on resources that belong to the broader community, she said. The room got quiet. Everyone knew she was talking about my ranch. I stood up and said, Linda, private property doesn't become public property just because someone wants to use it. A few people chuckled. Linda didn't. She gave me that tight smile she always wore when she thought she was the smartest person in the room and replied, We'll have to agree to disagree. Whenever Linda said that, trouble usually followed. For the next couple of weeks, things were quiet. Too quiet, honestly. Emma even joked that maybe Linda had finally found a hobby that didn't involve bothering ranchers. Then came that cold October morning. I woke up before dawn like I always did, poured a cup of coffee, and started reviewing surveillance notifications on my phone. We had cameras across the property because equipment theft had become more common in recent years. Normally the alerts were deer, coyotes, or the occasional wandering elk. That morning, one notification caught my attention immediately. Human movement detected. Northern pasture. I opened the live feed expecting to see a fence contractor or maybe one of our employees checking equipment. Instead, I saw 4 men carrying hunting rifles walking across the pasture. And leading them straight through a locked access gate was Linda Crawford herself. At first, I honestly thought I was looking at old footage. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. Then Linda stopped, pointed toward the protected grazing fields, and began gesturing like a tour guide introducing tourists to a national park. My coffee suddenly didn't taste quite as good. Emma walked into the kitchen and immediately noticed my expression. "What's wrong?" she asked. I handed her the phone. 10 seconds later, she looked up and said the exact same thing I was thinking. She didn't. Oh yes, she absolutely did. The thing about living in ranch country is that you learn very quickly the difference between inconvenience and danger. A broken fence is an inconvenience. A flat tire in a back pasture is an inconvenience. 4 armed hunters following an HOA president into a restricted conservation zone is danger. Real danger. Not because the hunters necessarily intended to do anything wrong, but because they were operating under bad information, and bad information has a way of turning into disasters faster than most people realize. Emma grabbed her camera without me even asking. My daughter Avery came downstairs a minute later and could tell from our faces that something serious was happening. "What's going on?" she asked. I showed her the screen. She stared at it for a moment and then blinked twice. "Is that Linda?" "Unfortunately." "Why does she look like she's giving a field trip?" That's a question I'd love answered myself. Within minutes, we were in the truck heading toward the northern section of the ranch. The entire drive took maybe 7 minutes, but it felt longer because I kept imagining every possible outcome. The hunters could accidentally cross into breeding areas. They could spook the herd. One of the bulls could become aggressive. Somebody could get hurt. Every scenario running through my head ended badly. As we got closer, I could see them through my binoculars. Linda was walking ahead of the group with the confidence of someone who had never once considered the possibility that she might be wrong. The hunters looked to be decent enough guys. They were dressed professionally, carrying proper gear, and didn't appear reckless. If anything, they seemed to trust that the woman guiding them knew what she was doing. That was the problem. They trusted Linda. We parked about 100 yards away and stepped out. The morning air was cold enough to sting your lungs. Frost-covered patches of grass, and the rising sun was just beginning to light the hills beyond the pasture. It would have been a beautiful morning if I wasn't watching a potential legal and environmental nightmare unfold in front of me. One of the hunters noticed me first. He nudged another guy and pointed. Then Linda turned around. For a split second, I thought she might finally realize she'd crossed the line. Instead, she smiled. Actually smiled. Then she started waving her clipboard above her head like she was greeting an old friend. "Cole," she shouted. "Good, you're here." The fact that she sounded excited somehow made everything worse. I walked toward them slowly. Emma and Avery followed behind, recording everything. Linda immediately noticed the cameras. "Why are you filming?" she asked. "Why are you trespassing?" I answered. Her smile disappeared. "We're not trespassing. You're standing on my property. This area should be community accessible. That's not how ownership works." The hunters exchanged nervous glances. One of them finally stepped forward. "Sir, we were told permission had been arranged." I looked directly at him. Permission wasn't arranged. Nobody contacted me. Nobody contacted my ranch manager. Nobody contacted the state conservation office. Whoever told you otherwise was wrong. He immediately looked uncomfortable. Honestly, I felt bad for the guy. He clearly thought he had followed the proper process. Linda jumped back into the conversation before he could respond. The community approved this initiative. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes disbelief comes out sounding like laughter. "Linda, the community doesn't own my ranch. You can't keep resources from everyone forever." "Resources?" I said. "These aren't resources. They're protected breeding grounds." She rolled her eyes. Actually rolled her eyes. "You always exaggerate." That's when I realized something important. Linda truly had no idea what she had walked into. She wasn't ignoring the danger because she understood it and didn't care. She was ignoring it because she didn't believe it existed. In her mind, I was just another stubborn rancher protecting territory for selfish reasons. Before I could respond, a sound rolled across the pasture. Deep, low, powerful. Every person standing there heard it. The conversation stopped instantly. Another bellow followed a few seconds later. This one louder, longer, the kind of sound you don't just hear with your ears. You feel it in your chest. The hunters turned first. Their expressions changed immediately. People who spend time outdoors understand animal behavior. They recognized the warning. Linda didn't. "What was that?" she asked. Nobody answered. We were all looking toward the tree line. A few moments later, the first bull emerged from the shadows. Then another. Then another. Massive animals. Dark coats. Thick shoulders. Heads held high. They weren't charging. They weren't panicking. But they were absolutely focused on the group standing inside their territory. I heard one hunter quietly say, "Oh boy." Another muttered something I probably shouldn't repeat on YouTube. Linda's face drained of color. "Those are bigger than I thought. Bigger than you thought." I remember that sentence because it perfectly summarized every interaction I'd ever had with her. Every problem looked smaller from a distance. Every consequence seemed hypothetical until it was standing directly in front of her. The lead bull took several slow steps forward. Not aggressive, just deliberate, confident. The kind of confidence that comes from being an animal that weighs nearly a ton and knows exactly where it belongs. I raised my hand. Nobody run. The hunters listened immediately. Linda didn't move. She looked frozen. "Linda," I said calmly. "Listen carefully. Start backing away. Slowly." "Are they dangerous?" she whispered. The irony almost knocked me over. 5 minutes earlier, she had been acting like the authority on land management. Now she was asking me whether the giant protected bulls she'd ignored were dangerous. "Right now, they're curious," I said. "Let's keep it that way." The hunters followed instructions perfectly. Small steps. No sudden movements. Eyes on the animals. One of them later told me he'd never been so nervous in his life. And this was a guy who had hunted grizzlies. Linda finally started moving backward. Her clipboard slipped from her hand and landed in the grass. Nobody bothered picking it up. We had more important concerns. Once everyone reached a safer distance, I guided them toward a service road leading away from the pasture. The bulls stopped advancing and simply watched. Their point had been made. This was their territory, and they weren't interested in sharing it with uninvited guests. As soon as we reached the vehicles, I made the call. The sheriff's department already knew our ranch because of the conservation program, so when I explained the situation, they took it seriously immediately. I also forwarded live camera access and recorded footage showing exactly how the group entered the property. While we waited, Linda began rebuilding her confidence. It was fascinating to watch. Fear lasted maybe 10 minutes before arrogance started growing back. "This entire situation is being blown out of proportion," she announced. One hunter stared at her. "Ma'am, we almost walked into a protected breeding area. Nobody got hurt." "That's not really the point," he replied. Another hunter stepped forward. "If we'd known this was private property, we wouldn't have come." Linda looked genuinely offended. I was trying to help. The first hunter shook his head. Helping usually involves permission. That line hit harder than anything I'd said all morning. Linda folded her arms and refused to answer. About 20 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived. The moment they stepped out of their vehicles, Linda marched toward them, carrying herself like she was about to receive an award. She launched into a speech before either deputy could ask a single question. She talked about community access. She talked about recreational opportunities. She talked about unfair land restrictions. What she didn't talk about was ownership. One deputy listened patiently, then turned to me. "Mr. Mercer, do you have the documentation?" I handed him a folder. Property maps, deeds, conservation agreements, boundary surveys, environmental program records. Everything neatly organized because ranch owners learn early that paperwork wins arguments. The deputy reviewed the documents for several minutes. Then he looked at Linda. "Mom, This is private property. But the community doesn't own it. I was acting in good faith. You still don't have authority to grant access. Linda opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. Then the second deputy reviewed the conservation paperwork. His eyebrows lifted slightly. You brought hunters into this zone? Linda nodded cautiously. Why? I thought it would benefit everyone. Did you know these animals are protected under multiple agreements? Silence. Did you contact any state agencies? More silence. Did you receive permission from the property owner? Even more silence. For the first time all morning, Linda looked genuinely worried. What happened next was the moment the entire situation finally caught up with Linda. Up until then, she had treated everything like an argument she could win if she talked long enough. But reality has a way of ending debates when facts start stacking up faster than excuses. The deputies stepped aside for several minutes while they reviewed additional information from the conservation office and checked property records. Nobody said much during that time. The hunters stood quietly near their trucks. Emma and Avery kept recording. I remember looking out toward the pasture and seeing the bulls in the distance, calm again, grazing like nothing had happened. Nature had already moved on. Humans, on the other hand, were still dealing with a mess. Eventually the deputies returned. The older deputy looked directly at Linda. Ma'am, here's the situation. You entered private property without authorization. You facilitated access for others without permission, and you created a situation that could have endangered both people and protected livestock. This is far more serious than a neighborhood disagreement. I watched her expression change in real time. Confidence became uncertainty. Uncertainty became embarrassment. Embarrassment became panic. I was only trying to help the community, she said quietly. The deputy nodded. Intent doesn't erase consequences. That sentence hung in the air. Even now I still think about it, because it applies to so many things in life. Plenty of people convince themselves they're helping while never stopping to ask whether they actually understand what they're interfering with. Linda wasn't some criminal mastermind. She was something much more common and, in some ways, more dangerous. She was a person so convinced of her own judgment that she stopped respecting everyone else's. The deputies documented everything and informed her that the incident would be forwarded through the appropriate channels for review. They also made it very clear that she had absolutely no authority over any portion of my property and that future incidents could carry even more significant consequences. By then, the hunters wanted nothing to do with the situation. One by one, they approached me, apologized, and explained that they had genuinely believed proper permission had been secured. I shook each man's hand. None of them had been the real problem. Bad leadership had put them there. Before leaving, one hunter glanced toward Linda and said something I'll never forget. The scary part is that if nobody had stopped this, we'd still think we were in the right. That statement stayed with me because it was true. Most disasters don't start with evil intentions. They start with bad assumptions that go unchallenged. As the vehicles pulled away, Linda remained standing near the edge of the road. The clipboard she'd been carrying all morning was tucked under her arm again, but somehow it looked different now. Smaller, less powerful. It no longer looked like a symbol of authority. It looked like a prop. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the risk she'd created, the people she'd misled, and the complete refusal to listen when multiple warnings were given. Sympathy only goes so far. The following weeks were interesting. News travels fast in small communities, especially when an HOA president accidentally leads armed hunters onto a protected ranch. The story spread through coffee shops, feed stores, church parking lots, and local diners. Every version got a little bigger, as small-town stories often do, but the central lesson stayed the same. Linda had tried to control something she didn't understand. Some of her supporters quietly distanced themselves. Others defended her, arguing she meant well. And honestly, maybe she did. That's what made the whole thing such a great conversation. How much responsibility should someone bear when their arrogance creates danger, even if their intentions were good? I still hear people debating that question today. A few days after the incident, Avery and I walked through the northern pasture, checking fencing and monitoring equipment. The bulls were spread across the field under a clear blue sky. Everything looked peaceful again. Avery kicked at a patch of dirt and shook her head. I still can't believe she actually brought hunters out here. I laughed. Believe me, if I hadn't seen it myself, I'd have trouble believing it too. She looked out across the ranch for a moment. Do you think she learned anything? That question took me longer to answer than she probably expected. Finally, I shrugged. I honestly don't know. Some people learn from consequences. Other people just get angry at them. Avery nodded slowly. We continued walking. The wind moved through the grass. The herd remained calm. And for the first time in weeks, everything felt normal again. Looking back now, I don't consider that day a victory because Linda got embarrassed. I consider it a victory because nobody got hurt. The animals remained safe, and the truth won before a bad situation became a tragedy. Too many stories end differently. Too many people ignore warnings until somebody pays a price. Thankfully, this wasn't one of those stories. It ended with paperwork instead of sirens, accountability instead of disaster, and a lesson that our entire community probably needed to hear. Respect property. Respect expertise. Respect the fact that confidence and competence are not the same thing. And maybe most importantly, never assume authority simply because nobody has challenged you yet. Because sooner or later reality shows up, and reality doesn't care how important you think you are. So now I want to hear from you. Was Linda simply trying to help and made a terrible mistake? Or should she be held fully responsible for everything that happened after repeatedly ignoring warnings and overstepping boundaries she had no right to cross? If you were one of those hunters and discovered you'd been brought onto private property under false pretenses, how would you have reacted? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I can already tell this is one of those stories people are going to disagree about. And if you've ever dealt with someone whose need for control created chaos for everyone around them, share your experience too. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next unbelievable story. Trust me, after everything I've seen over the years, this wasn't even close to the craziest one.